At Christmas dinner, my parents looked at me and my 7-year-old daughter and said, "Leave and never come back." 5 minutes later, they were begging me to undo what I'd done. At Christmas dinner, my parents looked at me and my 7-year-old daughter and said, "Leave and never come back." 5 minutes later, they were begging me to undo what I'd done. But when it happened, I was still holding my fork. Gravy had pooled at the edge of my plate, already cooling, forming that thin film that tells you time has passed without you noticing. My hand was frozen midair, fingers curled around the handle like they'd forgotten why they existed. Across from me, Lucy sat very still, her feet swinging just above the floor, whisper counting the peas on her plate. She only did that when the air felt dangerous. Around us, the table was loud in a way that felt intentional. My sister Marissa's kids bounced in their chairs, talking over one another, dropping crumbs without consequence. Laughter burst out easily, unchecked. No one told them to settle down. No one sighed. Lucy didn't move. She had learned, quietly and early, which children were allowed to take up space. Marissa sat across from me, her back straight, her lips curved into a smile she'd practiced. Polite, controlled, reasonable. The kind of smile that says I'm being fair while the eyes say I'm about to cut you off and call it boundaries. Her husband Colin sat beside her, nodding occasionally, chewing slowly. He had mastered the art of being present without being responsible. My mother, Lorraine, dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin as if we were at a tasteful holiday spread and not circling something sharp. My father, Thomas, stared down at his mashed potatoes like they might offer him an escape route if he waited long enough. The tension hadn't come out of nowhere. "Hannah, you look exhausted," my mother had said the moment Lucy and I stepped inside, her voice light but pointed, as if fatigue were a personal failure. Marissa had glanced at Lucy's dress. "That's very simple," she said, smiling. "Cute, though." Colin had laughed and added, "So, are things still tight for you?" I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed every word that rose to my throat. Because it was Christmas. Because Lucy was watching. Because I had promised myself again that this year would be different. Somewhere between the green beans and Marissa's third comment about how long she'd spent arranging her centerpiece, she set her fork down. "We need to talk," she said. My stomach dropped. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. This was the talk where my feelings would be labeled inconvenient, where concern would be sharpened into something else, where I would be expected to accept less and call it peace. Marissa leaned back in her chair. "It's just, things have been difficult, and Mom and Dad agree." My father didn't look up. My mother didn't protest. Colin kept chewing, eyes drifting toward the kitchen like this was background noise. "Marissa," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. "What are you doing?" She tilted her head, the smile still fixed. "We've all decided you should leave. And not come back." The words were clean, practiced, like she'd rehearsed them. Lucy looked up from her peas. My mother rushed in, as if she couldn't stand not being part of it. "Christmas is honestly better without you," she said softly, almost kindly, like she was commenting on a song she didn't enjoy. I blinked and looked at my father. For one brief second, I thought he might say something. A pause. A protest. Even a quiet hold on. He didn't. Lucy's small hand tightened around her fork. Something in my chest cracked. Not loudly, not all at once, but cleanly. Precisely. Like a plate slipping off a counter in another room. And in that moment, I knew I had two choices. I could beg, explain, shrink myself into something easier to tolerate. Or I could stop auditioning. I set my fork down. "Lucy," I said gently, keeping my eyes on her. "Sweetheart, can you go get your coat and your backpack? We're leaving." She didn't hesitate. "Okay," she said, sliding out of her chair with a calm that made my stomach twist. No questions, no tears, just relief wrapped in a child's voice. As she walked down the hallway, I realized something that hurt more than the words at the table. She had been ready for this. The room shifted the moment she disappeared. "Hannah," my mother said, her mouth tightening. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at them. All of them. The familiar faces. The familiar silence. And for the first time in my life, my face did something unexpected. It smiled. They thought the smile meant I was finally giving in. Marissa's shoulders relaxed, just slightly, like she'd won something without having to raise her voice. Colin leaned back in his chair, satisfied, the way people do when conflict resolves itself without costing them anything. My mother exhaled through her nose, already rehearsing the version of this night she would tell later. How hard it had been. How necessary. My father still hadn't looked up. They were waiting for tears, for anger, for a speech. Instead, I stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. It was an ordinary sound, barely noticeable most days, but in that room it landed heavy. Every eye followed me as I walked past the dining room doorway and into the kitchen. No one stopped me. They assumed I needed a moment, that I'd come back smaller. I didn't. I stopped at the cupboard near the end of the counter, the one behind the stack of holiday platters. Earlier that afternoon, I'd stood right where I was standing now, hands shaking as I tucked something behind the dishes. I'd told myself I was being cautious, thoughtful, waiting for the right moment. It turned out the right moment was the second they told my child she didn't belong. I opened the cupboard and pulled out 3 envelopes. They were plain, heavy in a way paper usually isn't. Each had a name written across the front in thick black marker. Lorraine, Thomas, Marissa. Behind me, the room shifted. "What's that?" Marissa asked. Colin let out a short laugh. "Are those cards?" My mother laughed too, sharp and automatic. "Hannah, what are you doing?" I turned and leaned back against the counter, the envelopes lined neatly in my hands. "Is this a guilt trip?" my father asked, finally looking up. "No," I said calmly. "This isn't guilt. This is consequences." Marissa stood up so fast her chair tipped back. "You think we need whatever you're holding? You think we're going to miss—" I didn't let her finish. I took the envelope with my mother's name and tore it straight down the middle. The sound was soft, but it cut through the room like something breaking for good. "Hannah!" my mother said, her smile faltering. I tore the second envelope. Slow, deliberate. My father's jaw tightened. Colin straightened, like his brain had finally caught up to the moment. "Stop it!" Marissa snapped. "What are you—" I tore the third envelope without hesitation. 3 neat piles of paper landed on the counter. For a beat, no one moved. Then Colin laughed. Too loud, too fast. "Okay. Wow. That's dramatic." "You're proving our point," Marissa said, her voice brittle. "This is exactly why." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I turned. Lucy was already in the hallway, her coat on, backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked up at me, eyes wide but steady. She didn't look surprised. I took her hand. "We're going," I said. Cold air hit my face the moment we stepped outside, sharp enough to wake my lungs. As we walked down the porch steps, I glanced back through the window without meaning to. They were staring at the counter. Then they moved. My mother leaned forward, picking up a torn piece. My father stepped closer. Marissa grabbed another, pressing it together like a puzzle. Their faces changed in real time. Smug to confused, confused to pale, pale to panicked. My mother's mouth opened wide. The door flew open behind us. "Hannah!" Footsteps, fast, uneven. "Wait!" Marissa's voice cracked higher than I'd ever heard it. "Come back!" Lucy's hand tightened in mine as we reached the car. "Please!" my mother cried. "Please!" My father sounded different now. Not calm. Not distant. "Hannah, stop. Just stop and talk." I opened the car door, still holding Lucy's hand. 5 minutes ago, they'd told us Christmas was better without us. Now they were begging me to undo something they still couldn't admit out loud. I slid into the driver's seat. Lucy climbed in beside me. I started the engine, and I drove away. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, a strange calm settled over me. Not relief, not triumph. Clarity. Some stories don't reveal themselves all at once. They unfold slowly, piece by piece, when you finally stop trying to make them end differently. And if you're still here, still following this moment with me, stay. What led us to that table, and what followed after, matters more than the tearing of paper ever could. Marissa is 5 years older than I am. That gap shaped everything long before any of us understood it. 5 years meant she was admired while I was managed. She was precious. I was practical. She was the one people worried about. I was the one expected to cope. Growing up, my mother liked to tell people that Marissa was her miracle. She'd waited for her. She'd prayed for her. She'd known from the start that Marissa was special. She said it with pride, like she'd personally negotiated with fate. Marissa learned early how to return that pride. She smiled on cue. She spoke sweetly to adults. She knew when to cry softly and when to laugh big. Strangers adored her. At grocery stores, women would stop my mother and compliment Marissa's manners. My mother would glow, shoulders back, voice warm. I stood beside the cart, holding onto the cold metal, reminded not to touch anything. If Marissa cried, the room shifted. If I cried, I was dramatic. Marissa took dance classes. I was told to watch her while my mother ran errands. Marissa was passionate. I was too sensitive. When she snapped, it was confidence. When I did, it was attitude. Holidays made the difference impossible to miss. Marissa opened gift after gift while everyone watched her reactions. She squealed at the right moments, hugged my mother just long enough to make it look sincere. My mother loved that performance, loved how it reflected on her. I usually got something useful: pajamas, a sweater, a book. Then I was handed a trash bag and told to clean up the wrapping paper. The strange thing is, I didn't know it was wrong. When you grow up inside a system, you don't question it. You assume it's gravity. You assume everyone else feels the same pull. By the time I was a teenager, I'd perfected the art of becoming invisible without leaving the room. I learned which opinions made my mother sigh, which topics made my father retreat into silence, which expressions made Marissa roll her eyes. So I stopped sharing them. Or I shared them carefully, trimmed down, harmless. I left for college convinced distance would fix everything. That absence would create longing. It didn't. They didn't miss me. They missed having someone to blame when Marissa was unhappy. But that's not the same thing. I met Andrew in my mid-20s. He wasn't flashy. He didn't fill a room. He noticed things. He listened without interrupting. He handed you a cup of coffee without announcing it. Like kindness didn't need witnesses. On our third date, I told him a story about my sister and my mother laughing at my expense. I told it lightly, like a joke. Andrew didn't laugh. "That's not normal," he said. I remember staring at him, confused. No one had ever challenged those stories before. They were just facts of life. He said it again, softer. "Hannah, that's not okay." Something shifted then, quiet but permanent. We got married a year later. My parents acted supportive in public. Marissa acted thrilled for photos. Colin joked that Andrew was brave for marrying into our family. Andrew smiled politely and changed the subject. Andrew worked as a structural engineer. He liked building things that lasted. He liked solving problems before anyone noticed them. He worked long hours on large projects, commercial builds, renovations, things meant to hold weight safely. It paid well, not extravagantly, but consistently. And because some part of me still believed love could be earned through usefulness, we started helping my parents. Quietly, $200 a month, every month. Sometimes more when something came up. A car repair, a medical bill, an emergency that always seemed to arrive shortly after Marissa bought something new. They never thanked me in a way that felt real. It was accepted like weather, like something that just happened. Marissa took credit without effort. "We'll figure it out," she'd say. Colin would nod. "Family takes care of family." Andrew would squeeze my hand under the table, a reminder that I wasn't imagining the imbalance. Then 6 months ago, everything broke. Andrew was on site for a routine walkthrough. A normal day. A scaffold platform failed beneath him. Later, we learned there had been warnings, complaints, corners cut to save time and money. They called it a tragic accident. The investigation didn't. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with my phone pressed to my ear, the world going strangely quiet. I remember thinking this couldn't be my life, and then realizing it was. After the funeral, there was no pause button. Bills arrived on schedule. Lucy still needed dinners and clean clothes and bedtime stories. I stopped sending money to my parents because the math no longer worked. They noticed quickly, faster than they noticed my grief. And that was when I began to understand that what happened at that Christmas table wasn't sudden. It was simply the moment everything hidden finally had nowhere left to go. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers, like fog rolling in after dark. Some mornings I woke up and forgot Andrew was gone for half a second, reaching for the other side of the bed before reality settled back into place. Other mornings I woke already exhausted, my chest tight before my feet even touched the floor. Life didn't slow down for it. Lucy still needed breakfast packed just the way she liked it. Apple slices, not whole, crusts cut off her sandwich, even though she pretended she didn't care. She still needed help with homework and reminders to brush her teeth, and someone to sit beside her at night until sleep took over. I did all of it with a smile that felt borrowed. The first month, people checked in. Friends dropped off casseroles that filled the fridge and then slowly disappeared. Cards arrived in the mail with words like strength and prayers written in careful handwriting. My parents came to the funeral, stood in the right places, said the right things. Marissa cried loudly. Colin held her, glancing around the room to see who noticed. After that, life resumed as if loss were a temporary inconvenience. The $200 Andrew and I had been sending every month stopped. Not out of spite, out of necessity. Rent, utilities, groceries, childcare. It all fit too tightly now. I opened my banking app one night and stared at the numbers until my eyes burned, realizing there was no extra space left to give. My parents noticed almost immediately. My mother started calling more often. Not to ask how I was holding up, but with that careful tone people use when they're checking whether something is still functioning. "Are you managing?" she asked. Managing meant, "Are you still afloat?" Marissa texted once. "Just checking in." A minute later, "You're being smart with money, right?" Colin made a joke at a family gathering I attended because Lucy wanted to see her cousins. "At least there's life insurance," he said, then laughed when no one else did. I didn't ask for help right away. Asking my family for anything had always felt like handing them leverage. I told myself I could handle it. I took on extra work. I stayed up late answering emails after Lucy fell asleep, my eyes burning, my body heavy. Then Lucy got sick. I missed work. The car needed a repair. The numbers stopped working. So I asked. Not for a rescue. Not for a miracle. Just enough to cover the gap until I could breathe again. They sent a small amount. My mother transferred it with a note that said, "Hope this helps." 2 days later, she posted on Facebook a photo of her and my father smiling in front of their Christmas tree from years earlier. A sad emoji. A caption about stepping up for family when it's hard. A line about hoping I'd learn to stand on my own again soon. Marissa commented first. "We're always here for her." Colin reacted with a thumbs up. I stared at the post longer than I should have. I didn't correct it. I didn't explain that Andrew and I had supported them for years, that what they'd sent was a fraction of what we'd quietly given. I just stopped asking for anything ever again. What I didn't tell them, what I barely let myself think about, was the legal process unfolding quietly in the background. Andrew's company dragged its feet. Insurance moved slowly. There were forms and meetings and phone calls that left my hands shaking. I hired someone to handle it because grief and bureaucracy don't coexist well. For months, it felt like shouting into a void. Then, right before Christmas, it happened. The settlement came through on an ordinary weekday afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table, Lucy coloring beside me, when I opened my banking app and saw the number. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. It didn't feel real. It felt like looking at a stranger who shared Andrew's face. I didn't celebrate. I didn't spend it. I made dinner. I helped Lucy with homework. I tucked her into bed and kissed her forehead. But the number stayed. And the first thought that crept in, quiet, persistent, was that maybe this could fix things. My parents were still drowning in debt they never admitted out loud. Marissa was always between opportunities. Colin had a talent for turning other people's money into plans. Maybe, I thought, if I walked into Christmas with something big, something undeniable, they would finally see me differently. Not as a problem, not as a burden, as family. So I prepared 3 envelopes, wrote 3 names, told myself this was the last attempt. I didn't realize yet that it wasn't an offering. It was a test. And they had already decided how they would fail it. I didn't sleep the night we left Ridgewood. The hotel room outside Harrisburg smelled faintly of detergent and coffee, the kind of neutral scent meant to belong to no one. Lucy slept curled on one bed, her backpack on the floor beside her like she hadn't fully decided we were staying. I sat on the edge of the other bed, shoes still on, hands folded, listening to the heater click on and off. My phone vibrated, then again, and again. I turned it face down. Lucy had seen enough panic for one night. I waited until her breathing slowed, until her body went heavy with real sleep, before I picked the phone back up. Missed calls, messages, all from the same 4 names. Lorraine, Thomas, Marissa, Colin. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then it rang again. I answered. Hannah, my mother said too quickly, her voice pitched high in a way that meant she'd been crying. Where are you? Are you safe? Is Lucy okay? Now, I thought. Now you're worried. We're fine, I said quietly. We didn't mean it, she rushed on. You know we didn't mean it. Things just got emotional. In the background, I heard Marissa's voice, sharp and frantic. Tell her to come back. Put it on speaker, my father said. There was a pause. Then the click. Hannah, he said, firm, controlled. This has gone far enough. Come back and fix this. Marissa jumped in immediately. Yeah, stop acting like a martyr. You're ruining Christmas. I looked at Lucy, asleep under the thin hotel blanket, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been at that table. You already ruined Christmas, I said. You told me to leave and never come back with my child sitting right there. We were upset, my mother said quickly. Emotions were high. I know, I said. I know exactly how that works. You don't get to do something like that and walk away, Marissa snapped. You can redo it. There it was. Not an apology, not regret. Panic. Rewrite it, my father said. We can pretend this never happened. I took a breath. It felt steadier than I expected. No, I said. There was silence. Then my mother's voice cracked. Hannah, please. No, I repeated. Not tonight. Not after what you said. I ended the call and turned the phone face down. My hands were shaking, but my chest felt oddly calm. Outside, cars hissed along the highway, indifferent. Inside, my daughter slept safely a few feet away. That mattered more than anything they could say. The next morning, Lucy ate cereal cross-legged on the bed, like we were on vacation. She asked if we could stay just one more night. I said yes, even though it meant rearranging work and plans. Some moments deserved to stretch. When we got home 2 days later, the quiet felt different. Not heavy, not empty. Intentional. I unpacked slowly, folded Lucy's clothes, put her favorite mug back in the cabinet. Every small action felt like reclaiming something I'd given away piece by piece over the years. Then I opened Facebook. Marissa's post was at the top of my feed, a photo of her in my parents' living room, smiling in front of the tree. Colin beside her. My mother in the background, holding a mug like she was part of a holiday ad. The caption was long, carefully written. It talked about family, about betrayal, about boundaries. Then my name appeared. Hannah showed up on Christmas looking for sympathy. Marissa wrote. And when we finally set limits, she humiliated our parents and stormed out. The comments rolled in fast. Praying for your parents. Some people are so ungrateful. Family is everything. Then she added the line that made my stomach drop. And yes, before anyone asks, Hannah got a huge payout after Andrew died and still refuses to help her own family. My phone started ringing within the hour. An aunt, a cousin, someone I barely recognized. Advice wrapped in judgment. You should apologize. They're devastated. Money changes people. I didn't answer. I made lunch. Helped Lucy with a spelling worksheet. Watched her color a picture of a snowman, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. I wondered how many adults it took to decide a child didn't deserve protection. By evening, something inside me settled. I had spent my entire life letting other people tell my story. Quietly, conveniently. I had believed that staying silent kept the peace. It never had. I opened my laptop, not to argue, not to defend, just to tell the truth. And if there's one thing I've learned so far, it's this. Once you start telling the truth out loud, you can't unsee how many people have been waiting to hear it. Some of them stay, some of them leave. Either way, the story finally belongs to you. I waited until Lucy was asleep before I did anything. Her bedroom door was cracked open, a strip of warm light spilling into the hallway. She slept on her side, one arm flung over her pillow, breathing slow and steady. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the quiet settle, reminding myself, again, why I was about to do what I'd avoided my entire life. Then I went to the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't write a rant. I didn't write a speech. I didn't reach for dramatic language or clever phrasing. I stuck to facts. Dates. Numbers. Screenshots. Clean lines that didn't bend. First, my bank history. $200 every month, year after year. I scrolled back farther than I meant to. Past Lucy starting school, past Andrew's last birthday, past the months when money moved out of our account so regularly it felt like rent. I took screenshots. Not the most flattering ones, the boring ones, the kind no one bothers to fake. Then I found my mother's old post from after Andrew died. The one with the sad emoji and the carefully chosen words about stepping up for family. The implication that I was irresponsible. That they were rescuing me. Screenshot. Only then did I open Facebook. Marissa's post was still there, still gathering sympathy. The comments had shifted slightly, curiosity creeping in where condemnation had been. What payout? Someone asked. That's awful, if true. I typed slowly. Not because I wasn't sure, because I wanted every word to land without wobbling. I don't usually do this, I wrote. But since my name and my husband's death are being discussed publicly, here is the truth. I explained what happened at Christmas. Simply. That Marissa told me to leave and never return. That my mother agreed. That my father stayed silent. That my 7-year-old was sitting right there. That I left because staying would have taught my child the wrong lesson. Then I posted the screenshots. Years of quiet, monthly support. No captions begging for praise. And beneath them, my mother's post. Still intact, still misleading. This is what family looked like before Andrew died, I wrote. We supported my parents consistently and privately. And this is what happened the one time I needed help, I added. It was posted for applause. I paused before the last line. I didn't storm out, I wrote. I left when my child was told she didn't belong. I hit post. I didn't refresh the page. I didn't watch the fallout unfold. I closed the laptop and poured a glass of water, my hands trembling just enough to notice. Outside, headlights slid past on the street. Somewhere down the hall, Lucy shifted in her sleep. An hour later, my phone buzzed, then buzzed again. When I finally looked, the tone had changed. Wait, you were sending them money? Why would they post about helping you if you were helping them? So they kicked you out and wanted your money? Marissa replied at first. Defensive, sharp, then angry. then quiet. Her post was edited, then edited again, then gone. My mother messaged me privately. Long paragraphs that circled the point without landing on it. Apologies for how things were perceived. Regrets that didn't name actions. I didn't respond. My father didn't message at all. What surprised me most were the quiet notes. The ones that didn't perform. I've been there. I wish I'd had the courage to do this. Thank you for saying it out loud. Stories travel when they're finally told. They sit with people. They make room. If you're reading this and it feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone. And you're not imagining it. The next morning, the doorbell rang. I knew before I looked. My parents' car sat in the driveway. Marissa's beside it. Colin stood a step behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes down. My mother held a cake, frosted neatly, as if sugar could smooth what words had cut. I opened the door just enough to stand in the frame. "Hannah," my mother said, voice too sweet. "We just want to talk." Marissa smiled. Not the smug one from Christmas. A careful one. "We've all had time to cool down," she said. "We're family." I looked past them, to the familiar shapes of people who had only come once they lost control of the story. "No," I said. My mother blinked. "What?" "No," I repeated. Calm, flat, final. Marissa's smile slipped for a fraction of a second. "Don't do something you'll regret." I thought of Lucy asleep down the hall, of the quiet house, of the way truth feels when it's finally spoken without apology. "I already did something I regret," I said. "I stayed quiet for too long." I closed the door. I locked it. And for the first time, locking someone out didn't feel like cruelty. It felt like protection, the kind that lasts. The quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was intentional. The days after I closed the door settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar at first, like wearing a coat that actually fit. No phone buzzing with demands disguised as concern. No sudden swings between guilt and obligation. Just mornings that began where they ended, steady and unobserved. Lucy noticed before I did. She slept through the night again. Not the half-sleep she'd learned during the months after Andrew died, but the kind where her body fully let go. In the mornings, she moved more slowly, humming while she brushed her teeth, asking if we could walk to school instead of rushing out the door. Safety does that to a child. It gives them time. I found myself listening more. Not for incoming trouble, but for ordinary sounds. The dishwasher finishing its cycle, the neighbor's dog barking, the wind moving through the bare branches out back. These were not warnings. They were life continuing. A week later, my aunt commented publicly on my post. "This is disgusting," she wrote. "Hannah and Lucy didn't deserve that." I stared at the screen for a long moment. It wasn't vindication I felt. It was relief. The kind that comes when someone finally says what you've been carrying alone. More followed, quietly, carefully. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sent private messages. Friends of friends shared the post without commentary. No pile-on, no spectacle. Just acknowledgement. Marissa said nothing. My mother deleted her old post entirely. My father remained silent, which somehow said more than anything he could have written. I didn't reach out. I didn't clarify. I didn't ask for reconciliation. I was done performing. 2 weeks after Christmas, I signed the papers on a small house in Cedar Hollow. It wasn't impressive. No sweeping staircase or dramatic entryway. Just solid walls, clean lines, and a backyard big enough for Lucy to run without being told to be careful. The first night we slept there, Lucy stood in the doorway of her room, taking it all in. "Is this really ours?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "All of it." She nodded, like she was storing the answer somewhere important. We painted her room the following weekend. She chose a soft green that reminded her of the park near her school. She got paint on her hair and laughed. I didn't rush to clean it. I didn't tell her to be more careful. I let her be 7. News traveled, the way it always does, through half-truths and whispers and people who pretended not to care but asked anyway. I heard bits and pieces through neighbors, distant relatives, even the cashier at the grocery store who suddenly avoided my eyes. My parents sold their house. Faster than expected. Retirement plans shifted. My father took on work he'd once sworn he was done with. My mother complained, to anyone who would listen, about how unfair life had become. Marissa told the story over and over, changing details each time. In some versions, I was unstable. In others, manipulated. In all of them, she was the victim. Once, Colin emailed me. It was short, polite. He said he hoped Lucy was doing well, that things had gone too far, that families shouldn't let money come between them. I didn't reply. Money hadn't come between us. It had simply removed the last illusion. Some nights, after Lucy fell asleep, grief still found me. Andrew's absence didn't soften just because my boundaries had hardened. I still caught myself reaching for my phone to tell him something small, the way Lucy mispronounced a word, the way the sky looked right before rain. But the grief had changed shape. It no longer carried fear with it. It no longer whispered that everything could collapse if I made the wrong move. It sat beside me, not on top of me. One afternoon, Lucy came home from school with a drawing. It was a house with two stick figures holding hands, a sun in the corner, a crooked tree. At the top, she'd written, "Our home." I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a star. "Do you miss Grandma?" I asked gently, not because I wanted a certain answer, but because I wanted her to know she could say it if she did. She thought for a moment. "I miss how I wanted her to be," she said. My throat tightened. "That makes sense," I said. She nodded and went to get a snack. That was when it fully settled in. Walking away hadn't made me smaller. It had made room. Room for my daughter to grow without shrinking herself. Room for grief without shame. Room for a future that didn't require permission. The hardest part was over, but the story wasn't finished yet. There were still choices to make. About money, about distance, about what protection really looks like when it's quiet and sustained. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready to meet it. 8 months passed without ceremony. Not the kind of silence that feels like waiting for something to break, but the kind that settles into your muscles once they stop bracing. Spring arrived in Cedar Hollow gently, as if it didn't want to startle us. The trees outside Lucy's window filled in. The backyard softened. I learned which floorboard creaked at night and which didn't, which mattered more than I would have guessed. The settlement money stayed where I put it for a long time. I didn't rush to change our lives. I didn't buy new furniture or a new car. I needed time to understand what safety actually meant when it wasn't borrowed from someone else's approval. When I finally sat down with a financial advisor, I surprised myself with how calm I felt. No guilt, no rush, just clarity. We paid for the house outright. No mortgage, no monthly reminder that one missed paycheck could undo everything. I set up long-term investments that grew quietly instead of loudly, conservative, predictable. The kind Andrew would have approved of. Lucy got a college fund, a trust, an emergency cushion big enough that her future would never hinge on anyone's mood or generosity. I signed the papers slowly, carefully, feeling the weight of each decision in my hands. When it was done, I sat in my car for a long time. I waited for the guilt to arrive, or the voice that sounded like my mother, telling me I was selfish, or the fear that said I'd made a terrible mistake. None of it came. What came instead was a steady understanding. This money was not a reward. It was not luck. It was not something to be shared to prove I was good. It was compensation for a loss that could never be repaid. I still grieved Andrew in small, sideways ways. In the grocery store when I reached for the brand he liked. In the hardware aisle when I caught myself wanting his opinion. Some mornings hit harder than others. Some nights I lay awake listening to Lucy breathe, thinking about how fragile everything had once felt. But grief wasn't tangled with fear anymore. We were sad, yes, but we were safe. Through other people, I heard what was happening back in Ridgewood. My parents sold the house sooner than expected. Retirement plans unraveled. My father took on contract work he'd sworn he was done with. My mother complained loudly about how unfair life had become, how children forgot their responsibilities. Marissa told the story over and over, reshaping it each time. In some versions, I was unstable. In others, I'd been manipulated. In all of them, she was wronged. What broke them wasn't just the money. It was knowing how close they'd been. $500,000. That number followed them like a shadow. They said it out loud to anyone who would listen, as if naming it could undo what happened. I heard it repeated with disbelief, with anger, with regret. It became a story they told themselves late at night. I thought that number might haunt me too. It didn't. What would have haunted me was teaching Lucy that cruelty deserves rewards, that silence is safer than truth, that love is something you endure rather than something that holds you. One afternoon, Lucy asked a question while we were baking cookies. "Why don't we see Grandma anymore?" she asked, cracking an egg carefully on the edge of the bowl. I didn't answer right away. "Because Grandma couldn't be kind," I said finally. "And it's my job to keep you around people who are." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to stirring. That night, after she was asleep, I sat on the back steps and watched fireflies flicker across the yard. I thought about the version of myself who had driven to that Christmas dinner with envelopes tucked carefully in her purse, hoping money could buy peace. I didn't judge her. She had been trying to survive in the only way she knew. But survival and safety are not the same thing. And peace that requires you to disappear isn't peace at all. I still grieved the family I wished I'd had. That loss sat beside the grief for Andrew. Different shapes, same ache. But grief, I'd learned, isn't a reason to go back. It's a signal to move forward with care. Some doors don't close because you're cruel. They close because what's on the other side keeps hurting the people you love. Standing in the quiet of our own home, with my daughter safe inside and my choices finally my own, I understood something that once would have terrified me. I didn't need their forgiveness. I needed Lucy to grow up knowing that love doesn't come with threats. And that lesson, quiet, steady, unshakable, was worth everything I'd walked away from. The first time I saw my parents again, it wasn't planned. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in early fall, the kind of day that feels forgettable until it isn't. I was at the grocery store in Cedar Hollow, my list folded in my pocket, moving slowly through the aisles because for once, I wasn't rushing. Lucy was at school. The store was quiet, ordinary. I turned the corner by the produce section and almost ran straight into my mother's cart. We both froze. For a second, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Life went on around us, completely uninterested in the history standing between two women who shared a last name. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders were hunched. Her hair had gone almost fully gray. She gripped the cart handle like it might roll away if she let go. "Hannah," she said finally, cautious, measured. "Lorraine," I replied. "Not cold, not warm, just accurate." She glanced around, then back at me. How are you?" Old instinct told me to soften the truth, to reassure her, to make this easier. I didn't. "We're doing well," I said. "Lucy's happy." Her mouth tightened at my daughter's name. "That's good," she said. "That's good." She adjusted a loaf of bread in her cart even though it didn't need adjusting. The silence stretched. "We didn't think things would turn out like this," she said quietly. I believed her. They hadn't thought that far ahead. They never had to. Consequences were something that happened to other people. "I know," I said. She looked up, startled, as if she'd expected anger or accusation. "You do?" she asked. "Yes," I said, but they still did. Something in her face shifted then. Not anger, not denial, resignation. "Well," she said, forcing a thin smile, "take care of yourself." "You too," I replied. I walked away without my heart racing, without the familiar pressure in my chest. I felt neutral. That surprised me more than anything else. Later that night, I told Lucy I'd seen her grandmother. Lucy paused over her homework. Oh, that's it? I asked gently. She shrugged. I don't really think about her anymore. My throat tightened. Is that okay? I asked. She nodded. I have you. That was all. No bitterness, no longing, just fact. A week later, my father emailed me. It was the first time he'd reached out directly since Christmas. The message was brief. No apology, no explanation, just a note about how things had been difficult, how he hoped we could talk sometime. I read it once, then again. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I'd finally learned the difference between closure and distance. Some conversations don't heal. They reopen. I chose not to reopen. As fall deepened, our days filled in around us. Lucy joined a swim class and learned to float on her back, laughing every time water splashed her face. I planted a small garden out back, learning the patience of tending things that didn't respond to urgency. Our life wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was steady. Andrew was still with us in quiet ways, in the way Lucy lined up her shoes by the door, in the way I double-checked the locks before bed, in the pauses before decisions, where I imagined what he might have said. His absence no longer felt like a threat hanging over our future. It felt like something we carried together. One evening, Lucy taped her drawing, the one that said "Our Home," to the hallway wall instead of the fridge. "So we see it every day," she said. I smiled. Good idea. I stood there after she went to bed, looking at the crooked lines and bright sun, and realized something important. The story had already turned, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with a quiet certainty that we were no longer heading back toward the people who had hurt us. I didn't need to win. I didn't need them to understand. I needed this, an ordinary life built on safety instead of tolerance. And standing there in the soft light of our hallway, I knew the last choice was still ahead of me. Not about money, about whether I would ever mistake familiarity for love again. The year ended quietly, not with closure, not with reconciliation, not with the dramatic apologies people expect at the end of stories like this. It ended with routines, with Lucy losing another tooth and insisting the tooth fairy needed exact change, with me learning how long it takes bread to rise when no one is rushing you, with nights that felt long in a good way. I never told my parents the full number. The settlement was $2 million. Saying it out loud felt dangerous, like it would turn everything that mattered into something ugly, like it would shift the focus from loss to entitlement. I had planned to give them $500,000 of it, enough to clear their debts, enough to let them breathe, enough to prove, one last time, that I was useful. They never got it. Instead, I bought safety. The house in Cedar Hollow is ours outright. No mortgage, no quiet panic at the end of every month. The rest of the money sits in places Andrew would have approved of. Long-term, conservative, boring in the best way. Lucy has a college fund, a trust, an emergency cushion that means her future will never depend on someone else deciding she's worth it. Money didn't erase the grief. I wish it did. Some mornings still hit hard. Some nights I still reach for Andrew without thinking. Lucy still asks questions at bedtime that don't have clean answers. Grief doesn't disappear just because you're financially secure, but it no longer comes with fear attached. We are sad, but we are safe. Through other people, I heard how things settled back in Ridgewood. The house sold. Retirement fell apart. Relationships strained under the weight of resentment and regret. What haunted them wasn't just the loss of money, it was knowing how close they'd been. That number, 500,000, followed them like a ghost. They said it out loud to anyone who would listen, replaying the moment as if repetition could rewrite it. I thought keeping that money might haunt me too. It doesn't. What would have haunted me is teaching Lucy that love requires endurance, that silence is the cost of belonging, that staying is always braver than leaving. One evening, Lucy crawled onto the couch beside me and rested her head against my shoulder. "Mom?" she asked. "Yes? Do you think Dad would like our house?" I smiled, even as my chest tightened. "I think he'd love it. She nodded, satisfied, and stayed there, warm and steady. That was when I understood something I'd spent most of my life getting wrong. Walking away wasn't the hardest part. Choosing not to go back was. Anyone can leave in a moment of pain. Staying gone requires clarity. It requires trusting yourself when the noise fades and the guilt tries to creep back in. It requires choosing protection over approval again and again, even when no one is watching. I don't regret tearing up those envelopes. I regret believing for so long that peace could be bought at the cost of dignity. Lucy doesn't remember the exact words from that night anymore. She doesn't replay them the way I once did. What she remembers is that we left, that I took her hand, that we were safe. And if, someday, she hears a story like this, someone else's voice describing the moment they finally stood up, I hope she recognizes the real turning point, not the money, not the confrontation. The choice, the quiet decision to stop proving your worth to people who only value you when it's convenient. If you've stayed with this story all the way to the end, you already understand how rare that choice is, and how much courage it takes to keep making it. Our life now isn't loud. It isn't impressive. It doesn't need defending. It's just ours. And that, after everything, is more than enough.